doing? I hope everything's fine.
Okay, you might want to say that again. I didn't have it on there.
Oh.
Say hi, Tom.
Hi, Tom. Tommy.
And tell Jennifer you remember her very well.
I remember Jennifer very well in Houston.
Yeah.
And the airport incident, oh my gosh, I remember that very well.
Okay, but we're not going to talk about that because these are just short little segments that I can do. And if the video gets too long, then it won't allow me to download it. So we're going to do short segments. One of the burning questions about Tom, or that Tom wants to know, is how you met Roy.
I met Roy. He was in a hunting party that was going hunting. Every year this gang of men met and went hunting up in there.
And he was friends with our dad, my dad, right?
Yeah, well, there was three of them. There was your dad, and then there was Bernie Wilger, glass company. And then there was Alma Gifford, the electrical company. And then there was your dad, the general contractor. And they all got together once a year and went deer hunting. Well, I didn't know these men, but they all decided to meet out at Henderson at our house, and where Lee and I lived. And anyway, they all met, and that's as far as I knew Roy. I didn't meet him more than 5 minutes, and I kind of got him confused with Bertie Wilger. And it wasn't until 3 years later that I met Roy again. And I can't even remember how I met Roy again, but it was 3 years later. I remember it was a long time.
Well, I remember, I think it was that Dad and Roy used to do archery together.
Oh, yes, they did.
And Dad was was very I don't know, I want to be nice about this, but it is what it is. But Dad didn't treat you very well, and he liked to kind of mess around with other women. And I think that had an impact on Roy. Anyway, one of the things that happened was you were at the archery deal, and Dad had a conversation with Roy about you. You want to tell me about that conversation?
You'll give me a tip and I'll go.
Well, it was the one where Dad was. Well, and it may not even been at the archery. I think maybe it was at one of the construction things where Dad had said something about you didn't have any friends.
Yeah, I remember that. Roy didn't tell me this for many years later when we were riding around in his truck, and it was on his mind, I guess, and he said something about it. And I said, well, what are you talking about? And he says, well, remember when the men used to quit work and come down to, what was his name? The owner of the company.
Homer?
No.
Sam?
Sam. I can't remember his last name.
Griffith. No, it's Homer, Griffith, and Sam. It doesn't matter, but...
It was Sam's office, and they used to all pile in there and have a beer and talk strategy over for the next day, and they'd sit up on this desk. And of course, your father got to wandering off from the company to the women, and he was going on about this purple and white furniture and how good it looked and blah,
We're talking about Janine's house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, he sat there, and one of the men evidently said, well, what's Norma going to do when she finds out? And he responded with, well, there's nothing much she can do about it because she's in this country by herself. She doesn't have any money, and she doesn't have a job, and she doesn't have really any place to live, and she doesn't have any friends. And I guess that struck a chord in Roy's throat. And he said to himself, well, she's got one friend here if she hasn't got any more. And that's the way it ended up. Years and years later, he told me about that.
Well, I remember you telling me that Roy came to you and you thought it was really strange because he came to you and he told you, and I think you were living in one of his homes.
Yeah, I was. And I thought, what's this guy being so nice to me for? Mark had asked me for some blankets to make an Indian tent out of. I remember that. And he was only 10, 8 in that area. And you know how kids are at that age. Anyway, I said, I haven't got any blankets, honey. Oh, Mommy, you had them this morning. Where are they now? I said, well, Daddy took them deer hunting. This deer hunting was right in the middle of everything. And I said, well, he had to keep warm up in the mountains. And I remember Mark saying, but we got to keep warm down here too.
And that's when Roy brought the blankets?
Yeah, Roy came, the truck rolled around that big old house.
Yeah, that's on Corn Lane. I think you're renting there.
Yeah, on Corn Lane with these big blankets, big package of, I think about 4 blankets, big blankets, beautiful blankets.
And Roy said, Roy told you with the blankets and said that if you ever need a friend.
Yeah, he did.
Mm-hmm.
He says, I'm your friend.
And then it came out years later why that conversation took place. So, because I need the videos really short, I'm gonna stop that right there for Tommy and the Allred family. That was probably the first interaction that we had with Roy. Our dad, we were renting the house at Corn Lane, my dad and my mom, but my dad was kind of not being very nice.
Well, then apart from that.
Well, hold on, because I want to stop this segment right here because that's a good stopping point. That was the first deal that the real probably introduction, other than being a landlord and being a friend to my dad. I think that's the first interaction that you really had with Roy, where he brought the blankets.
Yeah, he brought the blankets.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know him, and he used to come around every day and feed he had a horse around there.
Right, and he fed the horses. That's right, he kept his horses there.
Yeah, and he would come around and feed the horses.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think Scott at one time bought a motorcycle. It was too big for him.
Well, we're getting off the beaten track on that, so let's stop the segment right there. Roy had come to the house, overheard you with the conversation with Mark about blankets, and then he brought blankets to the house.
Yeah, and the other thing is, when I went into the house, there was a man in there putting a telephone in. You know, with that seat where Roy used to sit.
Uh-huh.
And I said to him, what are you doing? He says, I'm installing a phone. I said, but I can't afford that. And he said, this is courtesy of Sam L. Construction Company. That's who put it in.
Yeah, so I think the construction men were kind of looking after you a little bit as much as possible.
They were.
You know, knowing that the way Dad was and the way he was being at that time in his life. I don't want to put my dad in a bad light, but he did some bad things that weren't right. And I think he regretted them later on in life.
He did. He called me up here not long before he died and apologized to me and said that he was sorry that he was so, what was the word he used?
I think he said selfish.
Yeah, selfish was the word. How selfish he was.
Yeah.
That was the word he used.
Yeah, and but I think the construction men were trying to do what they could for you in the circumstances that you were in.
They'd bring a loaf of bread into this and leave it on the table there, and not say anything. That the last man standing would get it, and that would be Roy. and he'd bring it over to the house for me.
So, anyway, Tommy, that's the first probably interaction that Mother had with Roy. And, you know, of course, I've always adored him. But I was young and I looked at him as my father figure. So, I'm going to stop the video here and we're going to continue on with the conversation. But I just have to keep these segments short so that I can get them on YouTube. And I think this is a good stopping point. So, anyway, we're going to continue on. I'm just going to stop it right here.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye, Tom.